What up, Wizards? It's Devs. So, Boomtig down there, we like it in Magic, and we got kind of a fun one for you today, because Kaldheim has only been out for about 5 days or so on Arena as I record this. And that's not a whole lot of time, yeah, but in that time span, I've played about 8 hours of Magic a day. I've been treating it like a real job. Go figure. And I've been playing all the decks that have been popular on social media and a whole bunch of my own decks too. And some cards have been working, and some cards haven't. So as a result, I have formed, get ready for the word, opinions. That's right, the dreaded O word comes out. Now we are going to spend this video talking about some cards that have performed really well for me in testing, and then some other cards that haven't done anywhere near as well as I would have hoped they would have done initially. But that said, important disclaimer here, this is anecdotal evidence from one guy screaming on the internet about his personal experiences, which is never going to be a good substitute for scientific data or tournament results. You know, right now, we're still in an early period where no one can say for sure how Kaldheim is really going to affect Standard once we get into the season at large and get actual tournament results to go by. So keep that in mind. We're still very much in an observational period right now, but these are observations. So I think it's worth making this video. So let's go ahead and get into it because we kind of got a lot to discuss today. But last thing before we get to the cards, aside from liking and subscribing, do that if you feel like it. If not, I'm just glad that you're here. Appreciate you coming by. But last thing before we get to the cards here is that some of the overperformers are going to be cards that I didn't expect, diddly butt from when the set first came out, but they've done a lot of work for me. And then some of the other overperformers are going to be cards we knew were going to be good, but they're just like way better than I expected them to be, right? Same thing kind of goes with the underperformers. Some of these are going to be cards that the whole community expected a lot out of, and yet really haven't given me any juice whatsoever. And then some of them are going to be cards that are good Magic cards and will see some play. They just don't perform at the level I thought they would. So let's go ahead and get underway here with the first overperformer, Ascendant Spirit. I didn't expect this card to be much of anything. I mean, it looked really cool. But in the end of the day, I mean, it's a 1-drop you have to invest so much mana in for it to be a decent creature, and you have to play snow and all that. Well, in practice so far, this has actually been one of the best finishers in the snow deck, and if you have ways to protect it, counter spells, ways to reanimate it, which the snow deck has plenty of ways to do, this thing will win a long game for you in a lot of cases. Especially note, I didn't even catch this the first time I read the card, but you can use the last ability as many times as you want to. Keep putting +1/+1 counters on it to where it gets huge, drawing multiple cards whenever it hits for combat damage. The thing is just an absolute house that has plenty of ways in the snow deck to come back from the graveyard if it's dealt with. It can't be exiled by like Elspeth Conquers Death because it only costs the 1 mana, so there are a lot of ways. If your opponent somehow has a way to deal with this, that you can get it back, whether you use the Rhyme Staff or some other reanimation spell. This thing is really easy to keep on the board, and it's unassuming for the first few turns it is on the board, until it kind of becomes a headache. I've just been really impressed by this card, and I'm not sure that it's going to make the upper ranks of Standard or anything, but I really didn't expect it to do, like, literally anything at the beginning of the season. But since I've gotten in more and more work with the card, I've gained a healthy respect for it, and I also am respectful of it enough to kill it when my opponent plays it, because if you don't kill it when you first see it, it gets harder and harder to kill, and sometimes that can be a real problem. I'm not saying Ascendant Spirit is going to be at the top of the Standard ranks from here on out, but I will say I am far more impressed by this thing than I considered I would be. But let's get to the first underperformer, and I'd like to say this card really disappointed me and I expected really big things from it, but I wouldn't be saying that truthfully. Number 5 is Turgrid. I was excited to play this card. Oh, and the Lantern too, by the way, I guess. I was really excited to play this card, but I didn't have the highest hopes for it. Like I said during previous season, it doesn't do much when it ETBs. It requires extra support. If your opponent doesn't have cards in their hand, or if you don't have a removal spell of some kind to make them sacrifice something, then it doesn't really give you a whole lot of value. I was in some ways more excited about the Lantern, especially in like aggro decks, where it's an interesting form of reach and disruption, but neither half of this card has been particularly good. It's a little bit slow, especially compared to other 5-drops in this environment, right? Like Goldspan Dragon is a 5-drop in Standard right now, and it's probably the best 5-drop in all of the format. I wonder if Elder Gargaroth gets better now that Goldspan Dragon is in every deck with red. Because Elder Gargaroth has reach, and it's a 6/6, and it just like brick walls the dragon. So, considerations. But we're not here to talk about Goldspan Dragon, although it's not on the overperformers list. but it is probably the single best performing card from all of Kaldheim. So maybe it should have been on the Overperformers list. Goldspan Dragon's amazing, but when you compare Turgrid to 5-drops like that, you really start to see there's a massive difference between them. Even the just tossing on of a triggered, not triggered ability, but a keyword ability doesn't really help Turgrid too much, and she needs way too much support, and everything kind of has to go right. Your opponent has to be playing a deck with creatures that you can make them sacrifice. Your opponent has to have cards in their hand, and you have to have stuff in their hand to make them discard those cards. It requires so much extra work that neither half of the card is as good as I wanted it to be, sadly. Let's get back to the Overperformers with number 4, which is a card that I can't even think about without smiling. And that's the Trickster God's Heist. I blush thinking about some of the ridiculous garbage I've already pulled off in like 5 days with this dumb card, you know. One of the funniest things I've done so far with this is trade a token that I got from a Relic Robber for my opponent's Relic Robber. That was probably the best feel-good moment, but I've gotten a great hinge off of this. So, I mean, there's just so many cool things you can do. And yeah, the last chapter isn't great or anything, but like multiple hits off the last chapter and some hits from early game creatures can actually help finish the game. This is a form of reach, and honestly, this isn't a terrible card in an aggro deck. I've tried this in Dimir aggro, and even though Dimir aggro, not a very good deck, there's still a lot of fun things you can do with the Trickster God's Heist. You know, get in chip damage with some creatures that have ETB triggers, but aren't very good stats-wise or investment-wise, you know, and then you just trade them for your opponent's Goldspan Dragon a little bit later in the game. It's just a dumb card that just like Ascendant Spirit, I'm not sure this is going to hit the upper echelons, you know, the top tier of Standard or anything, but it is so much fun, and I expected the card would be fun. I just didn't expect it to perform as well in sort of a competitive environment as it has been for me so far. And again, I'm not ready to say the card is amazing or anything, but for 4 mana, you could do a whole lot worse. And as a matter of fact, a lot of the overperforming cards on this list are 4 mana sagas. So this is the worst of the overperforming 4 mana sagas, but I really didn't expect this card to be very good, where I expected the other sagas we'll talk about to be incredible. So just in terms of like most improved saga in my mind, Trickster God's Heist is like way up there on the list. But on to number 4 on the Underperformers, yet another god, this one, Redane. Now, this is one of those cards I was talking about. It's an Underperformer, but it's a good Magic card. I think this will probably find a place somewhere during its tenure in Standard. You know, it's got 2 years to do something, so you know, or a year or so to do something. So I think Redane will go somewhere before it's all said and done. But in all the decks I've tried Redane in, hasn't been particularly good. You know, a control deck here and there, a mono-white aggro deck, and a Boros aggro deck are the decks I've tried Redane in, and neither half is particularly great. The best part of the card is the part that I suspected would be the best part of the card, and that's the tax on, you know, big stuff that costs 4 or more and it's non-creature. Like, that's a fine part of the card, but the rest of the card is just okay. It's a little anemic in terms of stats, you know. I don't really care for 3 mana 3/3 flyers. I don't think they're good enough anymore. So a 3 mana 2/3 flyer, also, not amazing. And honestly, the shield half of this has been all but useless in most of my testing so far. You almost always want the creature half. You know, when we first saw Redane, the idea was that if you're playing an Elspeth Conquers Death deck against another deck with Elspeth Conquers Death, Redane would be incredible. Same thing with Ugin. You know, if you're playing a deck with Ugin in it, against another deck with Ugin in it, you just have a natural advantage if you get your Redane down first. But so far, those situations have been kind of few and far between for me, and maybe they'll be a little bit more commonplace moving into the format when everyone realizes Yorion is the best card in Kaldheim. You know, I have faith that Redane will find some place to be, but all the places that we tried her in, that we thought she was a natural fit for, she just hasn't really worked. Now, number 3 is a card that I kind of poo-pooed a little bit. I was nowhere near excited enough about this during spoiler season, even though I acknowledged that Dream Devourer is Black Ramp. I said exactly those words. Oh, it's Black Ramp. I think my exact words were that, it's kind of Black Ramp. No, it's just straight up Black Ramp, and that's good. It turns out. You do waste a couple of turns on Dream Devourer, the turn 2 playing it, the turn 3 foretelling a thing. And I'm still not a huge fan of that, the sort of time and turn investment of a Dream Devourer. But what I like is 6 mana Ugins, man, 4 mana Vorinclexes and stuff like that, 4 mana, Burning Rune Demons and whatnot. Those are really good plays. Those are fantastic plays. Plays where you can foretell a couple of things and then cast them on the same turn, even though they're both very expensive. Those double spell, but they're both 5 mana spells. Those turns are really good with Devourer too. The card is not a very good top deck, and it's a little bit awkward to set up, but nonetheless, I do think Dream Devourer might have a future in Standard in decks that just don't have access to green ramp effects or whatever. For what it's worth, even in the Jund deck that a lot of people are experiencing with or experimenting with right now, Dream Devourer is a better ramp spell than most other 2 mana things, because this effectively ramps you by 2 mana at the cost of your turn 3 in most cases, which is just better than a lot of cases than like a mana dork. So Dream Devourer is just much better than I expected it to be, and a lot of people tried to tell me it was going to be better than I thought it was going to be, but I guess I didn't listen. So here's me acknowledging the Dream Devourer is a good card. Now, number 3 on the Underperformers list is also a very good Magic card that I think will affect Standard moving forward, but it's probably also a really controversial pick for the Underperformer list, but I'm just going to say it. Doomscar. Have y'all experienced this too? Anyone that spent 4 wild cards on a Doomscar? Have you experienced that maybe this isn't as good as we thought? Now, the reason I say that is because we all thought it was going to be like the best card in the set. Most people that I saw on the internet was like, dude, Doomscar is going to affect Standard more than any other card, period. And so far, in my experience, that just hasn't been the case. Whether people are playing fewer creature-oriented decks, maybe people are playing more combo-y things, and that's probably a factor of it being the beginning of the season and everyone's trying out these fun new cards and trying to do weird, janky stuff. And we'll settle into powerful synergies a little bit later on. Right now, everyone's having their fun, so a card like Doomscar doesn't look as good as it probably will be, especially if aggro takes a hold of the format. But the problem is that aggro really hasn't taken hold of the format. The card's just not really good against rogues. The card's not good against Yorion decks, which are a real factor right now. The card's not good against Lurrus decks. The card's not good against mono green food 90% of the time because the Great Hinge just gives them such a way to recover onto the board. And they have Feasting Troll King and stuff. So these kind of sweepers just aren't as good in a world full of recursible creatures and powerful reanimation spells. Ways of getting back on the board really, really quickly, Ways of getting card advantage so easily in the late game, like the Great Hinge. Doomscar is a good Magic card. I'll say it a million times. It's a good Magic card that will affect Standard and probably does make control decks a lot better. But as far as how the Standard format is shaking out so far, the things that people have been playing, this card just hasn't been as good as I wanted it to be because there's no just hard-line, straight-up aggro decks. And even if you are able to Doomscar on turn 3 or whatever and just peel your opponent's whole board off the table, there are just so many good ways of recovering from that right now that a 3-mana sweeper just isn't as good as it would have been 5 years ago. But keep in mind, I'm not saying that Doomscar is a bad card. I think Doomscar is a very good Magic card that will see a ton of Standard play. It's just that maybe WotC has created an environment where a 3-mana sweeper isn't broken. And that's good. Good for you, Wizards of the Coast. Good job. But on to the number 2 overperforming card. Now, the last 2 overperformers are cards that pretty much the entire community, myself included, knew were going to be good cards. We were excited about these. But they performed to a level that these might be Standard or format defining cards. And maybe we didn't see that originally. So number 2 is Binding of the Old Gods. This has been called a Golgari Elspeth Conquers Death, and I don't think it goes that far. It doesn't exile a thing on the first chapter. It doesn't get you something back on the third chapter, which in a lot of cases is one of the best parts of the card, is the third chapter. This third chapter is very underwhelming. However, it does cost 1 less than ECDs, and that matters. It has a whole range of things it can hit aside from just ECD can only hit 3 CMC things and up. So Binding really matters, especially against, 2 CMC enchantments and stuff. Sometimes you play against Shrines. More commonly, you'll play against Trail of Crumbs on turn 2. And Binding is a great way of picking those up if you don't have other targets for it, in the mid or late game. Binding's always going to have a target, and it's just amazing. In Golgari colors, which you can splash, Sultai, you can splash Abzan, whatever. It's just so cool to have a 4-drop that can take out any problematic card on the whole table. Doesn't matter. You know, at this point, you don't have to fit in. You know, in your green-black deck, you don't have to, like, sideboard in, like, disenchant or naturalize type effects or anything. You just have a thing that wipes out whatever you want. So, you know, Great Hinge, no longer a problem if your opponent is on the play and goes turn 3 Lovestruck Beast into turn 4 Great Hinge. Whatever, I got a Binding. I don't care about your Great Hinge or your Lovestruck Beast, depending on which one is more pertinent to take out at that point. So, Binding just does so much in this format right now. It opens up so many paths for mid-range decks. You know, it's got a little bit of ramp on it too. You know, it can go get Triomes, because Triomes that produce green are forests, and that's turned out to be really good, like life-saving, even though the thing comes in a play tapped. You know, you untap with it, and suddenly, you know, on turn like 6, you've got 1,000,000 mana. Just because of the 1 mana, this thing, it's amazing how much of a difference that 1 mana can make. So, you know, it's a great top deck too. It's just a really good... I've been talking about Binding for way too long at this point for the scope of this video that I wanted to create. But, you know, it's just, that's how impressed I've been by this card. Again, I think we might have, in some ways, a standard defining card on us in the same way that ECD is a standard defining card. And when you're at that level, you definitely deserve some recognition. Now, number 2 on the Underperformers list is further illustration that good cards can be on the Underperformers list, and that's Quakebringer. Now, this one I've been somewhat disappointed by. It is really decent, not terrible, in the red-black Croxa deck that plays like this and Egon. It got a couple of cards from this set. I think Quakebringer is mostly meant for that deck. However, in the Giants deck, you play the card, but it's nowhere near the best giant in the deck, you know? Like, Calamity Bearer is the best giant in the Giants deck by a whole lot, except for maybe Bone Crusher. You know, it kind of depends on what metrics you're using. But pound for pound, Calamity Bearer is a ridiculous card. That should have been on the Overperformers list, honestly. I've still got time. But still, Quakebringer isn't even the best, like, 5-drop red card or red creature in the set. I've already told you what the best 5-drop red creature in the set is, and Quakebringer is nowhere near the level of Goldspan Dragon, as much as I want to like Quakebringer. And it has been decent in a couple of Rogues matchups. It turns out that people are still packing stuff like Cling to Dust and Scavenging Ooze and Elspeth's Nightmare, to where Quakebringer just doesn't matter as much as I really want it to. I want Quakebringer to be good so bad, and I still believe that on some level this is a playable standard Magic card, but it's probably not as good as I wanted it to be, and a whole lot of other people for that matter. But let's get to the number 1 overperforming card that I might gush about even more so than Binding of the Old Gods, if that's possible. Yet another 4-mana saga. These are just everywhere on this list, and I apologize for that, but I guess it is what it is. I couldn't help that these are the cards that overperform the most for me. Number 1, and you may have already called it, is Showdown of the Scalds. What you're looking at right here on your screen is possibly part of the new best card draw engine in Standard. It helps out so many decks, whether we're talking about like Jeskai Yorion, which can finally be a thing. This is like the best card in Jeskai Yorion. Card's just unbelievable. It makes your Charming Princess bigger, and maybe your Giant Killer's bigger, your Bone Crusher Giant's bigger. It makes your Yorion's bigger so they can fly through for like 5 or 6 damage and stuff. So like the second and third chapter on this is something you actually have to worry about. Especially in the aggro decks. That was the other thing I was going to say, is that it's not just for the Yorion decks. This is also really good. This gives new life to the Boros Warriors decks and the Boros Knights decks. You know, anything red-white that's aggro-oriented, this is fantastic in. You know, it gives you sweeper protection in a way, because it gives you 4 cards, all of which are really cheap to cast the turn after you cast this. Or maybe you cast it on turn 5, you cast a 1-drop with it. I've cast an Usher of the Fallen off of this like a billion times at this point. It's not a bad play whatsoever. We played with this card on stream not long ago, and it overperformed on stream. It's just it's a very good Magic card, so far at least, in my experience. It goes really well with Shepherd of the Flock. Like, this together with Shepherd of the Flock is probably the actual like new best card advantage engine in Standard. I'm not, like, no exaggeration whatsoever. It's an unbelievable combo. And you know, in those Boros aggro decks where you play Showdown, you can easily fit in Shepherd of the Flock, and Shepherd does a whole lot of other cool stuff in those Boros decks too. You know, it picks up a Skyclave Apparition sometimes, so you know, it's just not a wasted card even if you're not getting value off of Showdown with it. Shepherd is amazing with this. But it's also obviously good with Yorion. It's good with other stuff that returns things to your hand or flickers or whatever. But even if you only expect to get 1 use out of this, you know, you're never going to return it to your hand, you're never going to blink it or whatever. Even if you just get 1 use out of this, on turn 4 in your aggro deck, it's an unbelievable turn 4 play, you know, because on turn 5, you're probably going to be able to play most of those cards. Your creatures are going to get huge. Again, it's great sweeper protection if you got hit by a Doomscar or a Shatter the turn before or the turn, you know, after you played this or whatever. Then you just have so much, you know, so many extra cards. It's like a refill on turn 4 for your aggro deck, and it's like a multi-time refill, you know, 3 or 4 times in a game for the stupid Yorion deck, which does play creatures that want +1/+1 counters. It's just like, it goes good in fast decks, it goes well in slow decks, it goes well in combo decks. There's just so many cool interactions with the card in Standard. This is a much, much better card than I expected it to be, and I already expected it to be a very good Magic card. So I just think you're looking at a card that's probably going to be fairly important in Standard moving forward. And number 1 is the biggest meme of the early Kaldheim Standard season, and that is Tibbles Trickery. Now, I put this on the list as it's more of an overrated card than it is an underperformer, and it is an underperformer for me. It is, because in case you don't know the meme yet, what you're supposed to do is on turn 2, you cast a Stolen Coil Serpent for 0 mana, or you cast a Tormod's Crypt because it costs 0 mana. And you pay 2 and you counter that with your own Tibbles Trickery, at which point you get an Ugin, or you get a Kiora Best the Sea God, or perhaps a Cragplate Behemoth. Is that what it's called? Is it a Baloth or is it a Behemoth? I'm going to go with Behemoth. I'm probably wrong. But either way, you know, you get some giant 7 or 8 mana thing on turn 2 and you laugh and you win the game because your opponent hates scoops or whatever. But this is not going to happen every time. The deck absolutely has to play more than 16 cards. so there's that. And sometimes you'll hit stuff you don't want to hit. Or you hit a Tormod's Crypt with your Stolen Coil Serpent. And you pretty much just scoop when that happens. I mean, it's no Aetherworks Marvel. Let me put it that way. And Aetherworks Marvel was famously inconsistent, to say the least. I mean, if I would imagine, you know, I've played probably, 10 games with Tibbles Trickery decks right now. And that's all I had to play to know. The deck is grossly inconsistent and nowhere near the level it needs to be to have garnered the attention that it's gotten so far. You know, if Tibbles Trickery is the best deck in Standard come, you know, some tournament results, if for 2 weeks in a row Tibbles Trickery is at the very top of the format, it's 7 out of 8 decks in the top 8, then I will gladly admit my wrong here. But, you know, just in my small experience with the card so far, the deck is probably only capable of getting a turn 2 Ugin like 20% of the time. Even with the London Mulligan, it's just nowhere near as good as you want it to be. It's not consistent. I know it's a meme. I know you saw Merchant and a whole bunch of other content creators get a turn 2 Ugin, and you may have even done it on your own time at this point, but the deck is not competitive, and Tibbles Trickery has just been kind of a trash card for me so far. I'm sorry. So there you have it. 5 cards that I've been really liking, and then 5 cards that I haven't been so good so far. And again, some of them are good. You know, Doomscar is a good Magic card. I'm not, for God's sake, I am not saying that Doomscar is a bad Magic card. Just like, not the world-ending end boss that we thought it was going to be at this point. But let me know how you feel down there in the comments section. Obviously, this is one that deserves a lot of discussion because there's going to be a lot of cards that, you know, people hate and thought they were going to love, or that people love and thought they were going to hate, or people, you know, people's pet cards that maybe I didn't mention on the list and that you think I really should have. So get down there. Yes, I like the World Tree. The World Tree's been fine. There's a bunch of cards that I could have talked about. Although honestly, Goldspan Dragon, it's Goldspan Dragon, everybody. No, best stupid card in the set is Goldspan Dragon. I've been having so much fun with Jund, mostly because of Goldspan Dragon. Tundra Fumarole is also really good, but I can't be here all day talking about cards I really like. So let me know down there. It's your turn at this point. Let me know what you like from this set and what you really don't like, especially if you thought you would like it. So let me know down there in the comment section. And of course, do all the stuff. Like, subscribe, self-promotion time. Go over to the Patreon if you want to vote on content around these parts. You know, we do a lot of deck techs. You want to vote on what decks we talk about, you might want to go to the Patreon. Patreon.com/SBMTG, or link in the description. Just $1 a month to vote on stuff. You want to see me play Magic? I do that. I obviously play some Magic. So if you want to do that, go to twitch.tv/SBMTGdev, or hit the link in the description. Aside from that, that's all. Did I actually nail the self-promotion? Good job, Dev. But anyway, that's it for now. So get at me in the comments section. Maybe we'll start a conversation. I'm Dub from The Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.